Earlier this week, Russia attempted to celebrate Black Sea Fleet Day, the anniversary of the founding of the Black Sea Fleet in Sevastopol in 1783 by Prince Potemkin. The Russian Ministry of Defence's official communique in honour of Black Sea Fleet Day went predictably heavy on the triumphs of World War II and gamely attempted to detect an echo thereof in more recent actions against Ukraine. The Black Sea Fleet, it said, had shown, quote, unparalleled bravery, courage and high military skill in battles with neo-Nazis as part of a special military operation. This is an audacious interpretation of a series of mishaps which has seen Russia's Black Sea Fleet lose, in the last couple of years, 20-odd ships and one submarine, nearly a third of its complement, to an enemy which has no navy to speak of. But it does remind of the importance of the Black Sea, not just to Russia but to all 6 of the countries which claim a portion of its coast. The shifting of the Black Sea's strategic sands may be a key catalyst of Russia's modern paranoia. Of the 5 other Black Sea countries, 2, Romania and Bulgaria, are members of Nato and the EU, 1, Turkey, is a member of Nato and an EU candidate, and the 2 others, Ukraine and Georgia, are also theoretically on course to join both organisations. Why does the Black Sea matter so much? How important have Ukraine's maritime victories been to its defence, and how crucial to Turkey is its status as the Black Sea's gatekeeper? This is the Foreign Desk.
After 1991, Ukraine and Turkey in the Black Sea always cooperated. One issue where we disagreed is that Ukraine always, together with Romania, insisted that we need to have greater NATO presence in the Black Sea. And Turkey always insisted that Black Sea security is the issue of the regional ownership, and they wanted to control the situation.
We always assumed the paradigm was that maritime security was something threatened by non-state actors. And then suddenly, with the war, merchant ships were being blown up, attacked by the Russians, and maritime security became a security against state action.
Turkey cultivates really good ties with all Black Sea countries outside of Russia, because it knows that Russia is militarily the superior power, it's a nuclear power, it's Turkey's historic nemesis. So as a result, Turkey has built excellent ties with Georgia, Bulgaria, Ukraine, and Romania. In fact, it's the least sexy of Turkey's global identities, but it's the most successful.
You're listening to The Foreign Desk. I'm Andrew Muller. We're joined, first of all, by Hanna Shelest, Security Studies Programme Director at Ukraine Prism and Editor-in-Chief of Ukraine Analytica. Hanna joins us from the Ukrainian Black Sea port of Odessa. And Hanna, let's start with the city you are speaking to us from. Odessa obviously has forever been a hugely important port for Ukraine. How have the last couple of years changed Odessa?
No, definitely. The 2 years changed the life of the city significantly on the one way, because we've been one of the main targets of the Russian information warfare for decades, and they considered Odessa as the pro-Russian city, what was absolutely false. But because of this, we understand that a lot of activities, first of all, through the proxies and in the hybrid warfare, were against Odessa. And if originally they hoped that Odessa immediately would surrender, this didn't happen. So they started attacks against the city, including the UNESCO protected infrastructure, a lot of energy infrastructure, a lot of attacks against the port and against the Navy. But that was the situation as the same around the country, just with the additional information messages spread in the city, so to make the disobedience or some kind of anti-governmental moods in the city. What we see now that the last few months, as they started changing tactics a little bit, they realized that Odessa would never surrender, that it is not pro-Russian city as they hoped. And their attacks started to be more indiscriminatory in terms of the targets. 2 years ago, we were thinking, downtown Odessa, it is historical, it is so important in all the entertainment, books, like all this culture for Russians. They will never attack it. Now they are attacking. The same as they just started using the cluster munition, for example. That gives a little bit of the bad thoughts, but at the same time just demonstrates the helplessness of Russia in terms of their attacks.
Especially when you look at what Russia has done, well, not just in the last 2 years, but the last 10 years, when you're looking at it from Odessa of all places, does it seem like maybe the Black Sea is the prize as far as Russia is concerned? It made the early move on Crimea. It's attempted to build that land bridge with Donbass. Is this basically what Russia wants, to be able to dominate the Black Sea in the way that the Soviet Union and the Russian Empire once did?
Russia thought that they are dominating in the Black Sea. Turkey didn't have their navy bases in the Black Sea. Romania and Bulgaria with the weak, quite navies. Georgia lost their navy in 2008. Ukraine de facto lost in 2014. So in 2022, Russians thought we are controlling the Black Sea. It's our lane. Since last year, when Ukraine started to use the marine drones very successfully, even from April 2022, when with Ukrainian-made missile, we managed to sink the biggest Russian flagman ship in the Black Sea, that demonstrated that a lot of the talks about the mighty Russian Navy or the mighty Russian forces in Crimea, that Crimea is the second most protected place in Russia after the Kremlin, that was more about the messages, nice propaganda, rather than the reality on the ground.
About those attacks that Ukraine has been undertaking with considerable success on Russian ships, does it feel like to you that those do actually have a strategic purpose, or are they mostly a means of keeping the morale of Ukrainians up? Because obviously, a great naval victory like sinking the Moskva does attract headlines and must give the population a huge boost.
Psychological effects always matter. Any type of the victory is important during the war, during the crisis. People need the good news. But strategically, that also matter. Because first of all, most of these ships, they carry different types of the ammunition that's been shooting the south. And they were exactly the threat to the ports, to the critical infrastructure of the southern regions, to the trade, to the agriculture. And now Russia needed to withdraw most of them from Crimea to Novorossiysk, to the Russian territory. In this case, there were less possibilities for them to go in deep waters to shoot and to have additional shooting capabilities, especially of the caliber missile. So when we are threatening different types of their ships, some of them were needed for delivery of ammunition from the Russian side to Crimea, because they cannot use the Crimean bridge for a lot of the heavy equipment. They still need to use ships for this. Part of them being carrier of the different types of the missiles. And the less of this carrier, the less capabilities they have to shoot from the southern dimension.
It was the case that eventually it was possible for Ukraine to begin shipping grain via the Black Sea from Odessa, thanks to that agreement that was brokered by Turkey. Turkey as well, obviously a major player where the Black Sea is concerned. Has it always been the case, though, that Turkey and Ukraine's priorities have aligned where the Black Sea is concerned, or are there tensions currently or historically there as well?
I would say yes and no, because after 1991, Ukraine and Turkey in the Black Sea always cooperated. Ukraine supported all the Turkish initiatives, Black Sea Harmony, Black Sea 4. We had a good level of cooperation, so we never had issues with Turkey. One issue where we disagreed is that Ukraine always, together with Romania, insisted that we need to have greater NATO presence in the Black Sea, because 3 NATO member states are littoral states. And Turkey always insisted that Black Sea security is the issue of the regional ownership. So here, Turkey allied with the Russian position, where they didn't allow NATO as an organization to be present and navies of the non-littoral states to be present, and they wanted to control the situation. However, even in 2014, it still worked. But in 2022, I would say that Turkey became one of the biggest losers in the Black Sea, even more than Ukraine in terms of political dimension, because they couldn't demonstrate that they are controlling even something closer to their territorial borders when Russian military was stopping ships with Turkish crews, for example, or making provocations against them. That's why the grain deal was important at that very moment. But we should not idealize that agreement, because it also allowed the Russian Federation to sabotage the grain deal and later to manipulate a lot with it, to bring additional restrictions, including for Turkey. And now, the last year, we are without that agreement, and we are perfectly even increasing the export of the grains and other goods from Odessa ports. So I would say that in terms of security, we don't see that it's jeopardized the shipping. But in terms of the possibilities, that's definitely opened additional possibilities for Ukrainian economy and for the food security market, global market.
You are, of course, right to point out that Turkey has been historically unkeen on allowing general NATO ships into the Black Sea. And it is, of course, Turkey who decides who comes and goes from the Black Sea. That being the case, despite the success that Ukraine has had in the Black Sea theatre, once this war is over, does Ukraine need to think seriously about becoming a proper naval power? Is it going to need a decent-sized navy of its own?
You know, in 2018, Ukraine developed the first NATO strategy 2035. It's been the ever first in the history of Ukraine, and even since the Soviet time, the strategy for the Navy development. I was lucky to be the only civilian advising that working group. And I remember all those discussions because we lost 75% of our Navy when Crimea was annexed. And they were discussions, what to do, what type of Navy do we need? And from the very beginning, we realized that we need asymmetrical Navy. We should be ready for the asymmetrical, and that it's not about platforms. It's not about having the air career. Black Sea is not so big. Yep. So you need capabilities. What type of capabilities we need? If we can do something with the Mosquito fleet, let's take Mosquito fleet. If we can do something with the marine drones, let's develop these because we can do much better. But then definitely each Navy, especially the country with the old Navy traditions, and Ukraine has centuries, more than 1,000 years probably of the Navy traditions, we would like to see some nice ships that can demonstrate Ukrainian flag somewhere. Plus, Ukraine is going to be a NATO member state. And we already, before 2014, for example, being active members of the NATO operation in the Aden, near Somalia, and also in Mediterranean. We always joined it, as well as the European Union naval missions in Africa. So that means that we consider our fleet also with the perspective of being members of the EU and NATO.
Hanna Shelest in Odessa, thank you very much for joining us. You're listening to The Foreign Desk. This is The Foreign Desk on Monocle Radio. I'm Andrew Muller. Now to NATO, which counts 3 of its members as Black Sea powers, Romania, Bulgaria and Turkey, while currently helping a 4th country, Ukraine, fight its war with Russia. We'll hear next from James Bergeron, Chief Political Advisor to NATO's Allied Maritime Command, also known as MARCOM. James was interviewed at the recent Delphi Economic Forum by Monocle's Chris Chermak. Chris began by asking when the Black Sea began to attract his attention as a pivotal theatre in maritime security.
When I joined MARCOM in 2013, my former position was as the political advisor to Striking Force NATO, which was the command carrier strike groups. And at the time, Black Sea was not seen as overly relevant to that. But it was when I became the political advisor at MARCOM, now you were responsible in looking at everything. And suddenly you began to realize the vulnerabilities. In 2013, and then, in 2014, that came home to roost with the hybrid attack and then the annexation, legal annexation of Crimea and the beginning of the Donbass War. What we didn't see until 2022, however, was just how much Russia was going to impact the entire sea, not just the Ukraine war. The floating mines, the attacks on commercial shipping that launched the war in February 2022. Actually, that also led to, I think, I could be polite and say it was a paradigm shift. It was a paradigm crashing to the ground. In NATO, up until that point, we have Operation Sea Guardian, counter maritime security operation. We had anti-piracy operations. We always assumed the paradigm was that maritime security was something threatened by non-state actors. We did not think about state actors. We began to get hints of the opposite in the last few years with the Houthis, with Iran, the Republican Revolutionary Guard, limpet mines in the Gulf. So you began to see proxy actors, third-party militia, special forces, but not outright aggression. And then suddenly, with war, suddenly merchant ships were being blown up, attacked by the Russians, and maritime security became a security against state action.
Why was it not recognized at that moment?
Well, I think the threats to borders were. I think the planning, the thinking we had at the time all did recognize the need to defend Romania and Bulgaria, including their waters. But what we didn't recognize was that there was going to be a potential disruption of shipping flow in significant amounts, which the Russians did when they blocked the grain shipments in the first year of the war, followed by the attacks to stop the Danube, because the Danube flow, which the Romanians did a brilliant job on this, the Danube flow of grain out north through the Danube undercut Russia's ability to use this as leverage, and therefore Russia began attacking all the Danube ports. So that was a big factor. The Ukrainians have been remarkably successful now in driving the Russian Federation Navy almost out of the Black Sea. Some of them are still in Sevastopol. Most of the ships are sheltering in Novorossiysk. They've done a remarkable job of that. And without a navy. They've done it with missiles, with sea drones, with air drones. It's a hard thing for them to do, and ultimately, like all navies, the Russian Navy will learn how to respond. But they haven't learned it yet.
Tell me more about Ukraine's response there when we look at the war currently. As you say, they have had a surprising amount of success.
Yeah.
Where has that success come from, and is there a version of this war where Russia perhaps even has to exit Crimea because of that success? Are they having more success in the sea war than they are on the land war, for that matter?
I think they admit that they are. They've had a remarkable amount of success at the sea war, partly because they've been given good technology, and they're making their own good technology, actually. A lot of the drones are coming from them. They've been very deft and expert in using them. They've been very clever. Countries and militaries, under the strain they are in, learn quickly to think outside the box and not use just conventional tactics. They've used unconventional tactics. And they've been daring. The old phrase about, fortune favors the brave. Can it translate to the land and air? To a degree, but unfortunately the land war is an amalgam of new technology and good old-fashioned hard slog with incredible expenditure of munitions. So high-tech is not going to solve that war alone, whereas high-tech has been very effective. But equally as effective as the Ukrainians have been, this is my view, I'm not an analyst, but the Russians have not been that effective. Their ships weren't as ready. Their defensive mechanisms didn't seem to work. One interesting comparison I'll give you is, right now we have U.S., British, European warships in the Red Sea trying to protect shipping from the Houthi missile attacks and drone attacks. We've taken them virtually all out. Certainly anything aimed at the warships have been stopped. Most of the other ones have been stopped. The counter-argument can be made, but isn't this really expensive? You're throwing very expensive missiles out after cheap drones. That's true, but the comparison is the Russians aren't even succeeding at that. They've lost a lot of ships to the same technology. So the Western warships are showing what they can do, maybe at high cost, but they're showing what they can do in the Red Sea, whereas the Russian Navy was not prepared. And I think that there is some anxiety. Rather publicly, the Russian Navy has not succeeded in dominating the Black Sea. Quite the opposite. It's lost the domination of the Black Sea. To use naval language, Ukraine doesn't exercise sea control of the Black Sea, but it now effectively exercises sea denial over a significant part of it.
What has NATO learned from that? When you talk about Ukraine's success there, particularly the use of drone technology, something that, as you say, Russia and Ukraine are using extremely aggressively in this war to varying degrees of success, as you're mentioning there. What has NATO learned from that? Is that something that NATO and Europe has been somewhat behind on, and can they learn from Ukraine in terms of this advanced technology?
I think, arguably, the Western powers have been ahead in the use of autonomy and drones. But to a degree, we were doing what Western militaries often do, which is to polish a cannonball and create exquisite technological superiority per platform at a very, very high cost. And the lesson here is you can fight successfully with a great number of cheap kit. And that we're going to have to think about, we're going to have to respond to. I think the biggest shock was the USV, Ukraine's success, and the biggest shock to the Russians certainly, was the success of sea-based or undersea-based drones, particularly the attack on Sevastopol, which I think was a game changer. And I'm pretty sure most navies around the world were now suddenly thought, it's like Scapa Flow in the old days, how do we defend our naval bases? We thought they were secure. And we are pretty good at doing this, but it is a game changer. It does require you to think differently. In the longer term, we have to think about how we do this in a sustainable way, if we have to.
Is that, in your mind, the biggest game changer for NATO? I mean, tell me about some of the other things that have changed in terms of maritime security and how NATO looks at it since February 2022.
Well, the blockade on grain And thankfully, Turkey's grain agreement, which got it flowing again to a degree. Then the Russians walked away from that. Then the attack on Danube ports. All of that in 2022 and 2023 woke us up to the threat to the international supply chains and commodity chains that could be impacted by this war or other wars. And I think up until that point, we were still living in the happy globalization-based post-Cold War era, where, international shipping just happens, international trade just happens, supply chains always deliver, we can operate just in time, no problem there. All that changed. Even though because of the Ukrainian success in forcing the Russian Navy out, and to some degree, something of an equilibrium has emerged. And that early on in the conflict, certainly within the year and a quarter, Ukraine showed through its technology that it could, if it wanted to, disrupt Russian commercial shipping coming through the straits to Novorossiysk. It showed that it could do it, but has largely backed off from doing it. And I think the quid pro quo is Russia has not gone off the grain so much lately. And I think to some degree, Ukraine won the war on grain, unless Russia comes back and tries to squeeze it again. But the lesson wasn't lost on the other capitals, that we now realize that we have to be ready to do something we haven't thought about in a long time, which is defend the freedom of navigation for global trade.
Just finally then, we talk a lot about these days the future of NATO, also how shifting political winds, frankly, could impact NATO, whether it's the United States or other places. I wonder how you think about that from a maritime security perspective. Is maritime security maybe also somewhat insulated from that because of the commercial shipping aspect and how that trading aspect and how that impacts the discussion also in politics around what needs to be done, what NATO's role is in maritime security?
I think that when threats to international shipping and international supply chains suddenly came into the question, that galvanized particularly global trading states, maritime trading states. They now all had significant stakes in this. Even more so than the grain deliveries, when the Houthis forced the significant redirection of shipping around Africa and up again. Eventually that equilibrium balances out, but during the interregnum months, you had a lot of things that were, especially seasonal goods, that were going to arrive on the shelves far too late to be useful. And I did wonder whether it was deliberate that the attacks were starting just before Christmas, because it's kind of useless getting all your Christmas presents on the shelves on the 16th of January. This is one thing we learned during piracy. I think it was the CEO of Next who talked to us at Brucey, this is way back in 09 or 10, saying, you're all worried about oil and gas shipping. No, that's not the problem. In a just-in-time economy, it's perishable seasonal goods. That's where the economic hit is taken, if they are delayed.
That was James Bergeron, political advisor to NATO's Allied Maritime Command, speaking to Monocle's Chris Chermak. This is the Foreign Desk. You're listening to the Foreign Desk with me, Andrew Muller. Geography dictates that whatever Russia may prefer to believe, Turkey is the crucial Black Sea nation. The only way in or out of the Black Sea is via the Bosphorus Strait, the narrow waterway which bisects Istanbul. Turkey's status as the Black Sea toll booth is enshrined in law by the Montreux Convention of 1936, which allots Turkey extraordinary discretion over Black Sea traffic. We're joined now by Soner Cagaptay, Director of the Turkish Research Program at the Washington Institute for Near East Policy. He joins us from the US Capitol. Soner, let's start with a general principle. Does Turkey really see itself as the default owner of the Black Sea?
In a way, yes, because there is this treaty, 1936 Montreux Convention, drafted at a time when great powers of the time, United Kingdom and France, wanted to be favorable to Turkey, to make sure that it did not ally with Nazi Germany in the forthcoming Great War. And so they gave Turkey the status of being the gatekeeper of the Black Sea in 1936. And the treaty basically says that Turkey can, for example, close the Turkish straits, Bosphorus and Dardanelles, the Bosphorus providing the only exit and entry point to the Black Sea to connect it to the outer seas. They made Turkey its complete gatekeeper, that Turkey can close this strait down when there's war. Turkey just did it soon after the war in Ukraine started. So while all the states around the Black Sea kind of shared its space, Turkey is the gatekeeper.
So has the relationship over the Black Sea with Russia always been antagonistic? Because Russia obviously also sees itself as the default power overseeing the Black Sea.
Yes, because another reason UK and France were nice to the Turks in 1930s, one reason being they wanted Turkey to side with them in Nazi Germany, The other one is that they wanted to box Soviet Union into the Black Sea. So they allowed Turkey to be the gatekeeper with the understanding that, of course, Turkey would see Russia through a hostile lens. Turkey and Russia are historic empires that have been in confrontation for centuries around the Black Sea. What is now Ukraine, Crimea, southern Russia was Ottoman territory until the late 18th, early 19th centuries. The Russians took these territories from the Ottomans, and they also helped to the independence of a variety of Balkan states, Romania, Montenegro, Serbia, Greece, and Bulgaria. So you could say that the Russians pretty much destroyed the Ottoman Empire. So the Turks consider Russia to be their nemesis, but they also play smart with the Russians. When they're left alone with the Russians, they try not to provoke them. And I think there's a sense in Turkey's historic memory that when left on their own devices, the Turks are unlikely to push back against Russia successfully. I wrote a foreign policy book on Turkey called Erdogan's Empire, and I had to count the number of wars Ottomans and Russians had fought for this book. They fought 17 wars overall, all of which instigated by the Russians, all of which the Turks lost. There are only 2 wars that the Turks have won historically against the Russians. There won't be a surprise. In both wars, the Turks were with others. The first is the Crimean War of 1850s. The second is the Cold War. So I think the view in Turkey is that if Turkey is alone against Russia, better not provoke it. If Turkey has allies, the West, then you can defeat the Russians. And right now, Turkey feels like it's alone against Russia. So it really doesn't want to trigger it too much.
Well, I guess to sort of edge us towards the present day, I mean, it is the geographical reality that Turkey is the gatekeeper to the Black Sea. There's no other way in or out. Was that fact the reason that NATO was so keen to bring Turkey in, along with Greece, in 1952?
Yeah, it was one of the reasons. NATO is called North Atlantic Treaty Organization. As far as I know, Turkey is not an Atlantic power. Neither is Greece. But that was the Cold War. One of the strategic visions held in Washington was to deny Russia with access to the warm seas. The Russian Navy cannot sail from Russian ports into global oceans much of the year because these ports are frozen, not the Black Sea ports. The exit of the Black Sea, of course, is through the Bosphorus. And by taking Turkey in and therefore having control over Turkish straits, I think NATO did something really smart. They blocked communist Soviet Union in the Black Sea throughout much of the Cold War.
Well, to bring us to the present day, when, of course, interest in the Black Sea has been revived by Russia's invasion of Ukraine, you mentioned earlier the 1936 Montreux Convention, which does basically give Turkey the right to decide who comes and who goes from the Black Sea. Has it changed much, not just in the last 2 years, but on Erdogan's watch generally, how Turkey applies that convention?
Not much, because this is such a favorable convention as far as Turkey's stakes and control over the Black Sea are concerned. It does make Turkey the gatekeeper. It says if there's a war, Turkey can close the straits. It has less ability to close the straits to commercial ships, but if it was involved in a war itself, it could completely shut down the Bosphorus, for example. And the way it works, the convention also says that the Black Sea is a limited access sea. It's unique among the seas in the world in that it's not open seas. Navies cannot just sail into it if they're not navies of coastal powers. The treaty says that only littoral coastal states can maintain large and permanent navies on the Black Sea. There are 6 coastal states other than Turkey and Russia, 4 others, Georgia, Romania, Bulgaria, and Ukraine. And guess what? Of these 6 states, only 2 have large navies, Turkey and Russia. So the Black Sea is technically a Turkish-Russian condominium. And I think that's been Ankara's view since the treaty was signed. They kind of see 2 large powers around the Black Sea. So number one, they love to implement this treaty whenever they feel like they have the power to do so. And number 2, Turkey cultivates really good ties with all Black Sea countries outside of Russia because it knows that Russia is militarily the superior power. It's a nuclear power. It's Turkey's historic nemesis. So as a result, Turkey has built excellent ties with Georgia, Bulgaria, Ukraine, and Romania. In fact, I would say if you consider Turkey's multiple global identities, Turkey has quite a few of them. It's a European country. It's a Middle Eastern country. It's a Black Sea country. Black Sea is probably the least sexy of Turkey's identities because we always think of it, we say, is Turkey European? Is Turkey part of the Middle East? But actually, Turkey is really part of the Black Sea because it's completely integrated with its Black Sea neighbors. Trade and tourism and commercial ties. It has very strong defense ties with these countries, including with Ukraine. Turkey supports Ukraine, has given it drones. Together with mud and poor Russian planning, the drones help prevent the fall of Kiev into the hands of Russians at the initial stages of Russian invasion. Turkey is building drones now with Ukrainian assistance. So I would say it's the least sexy of Turkey's global identities, but it's the most successful of Turkey's identities in the sense that it's really brought in a lot of regional integration. Turkish citizens can travel to most of these Black Sea countries with their ID cards as if they were in a travel zone, such as the Schengen zone with the European Union. So I think Turkey has done two things in terms of its global Black Sea politics. One is it's balanced off against Russia, and the other one is it's really jealously guards the Montreux Convention. Because if this convention was open to renegotiation, there's no way Turkey's getting a good deal as being the gatekeeper by itself. There's going to be too much great power competition from Russia to NATO to others coming in, and Turkey may end up losing its privileges. So I think this is almost like a sacred document in Turkey because it's so good for as far as Turkey's rights are concerned. Turkey does not want anyone to touch it or to come near to touching it.
Well, let's talk a bit about how they've applied that balance in the peculiar circumstances of the last couple of years. You've written about Turkey's approach and described it, to borrow your phrase, as pro-Ukraine neutrality. Was, for example, the grain deal that Turkey negotiated an example of that? This was the deal that allowed Ukraine to continue shipping its grain out of Odessa, through the Bosphorus, out of the Black Sea, into the Mediterranean, after Russia's early attempts to blockade them.
Certainly, I think Turkey's Ukraine war policy is quite non-binary. It's pro-Ukrainian, but not anti-Russian. And in this regard, Ankara has done a kind of a terrific job maintaining this precarious balance. So it has closed the Bosphorus to naval vessels of all powers. So that's not very good news for Russia. Russia had a number of ships on the Black Sea before the war, but it cannot bring naval vessels from other ports into the Black Sea now. And the more Russian ships the Ukrainians sink, the fewer Russian ships will be left on the Black Sea, one day perhaps none. But by the same token, Turkey has also prevented NATO countries from bringing naval vessels to help Ukraine. So you could argue that it works both ways. That's how Turkey is kind of maintaining a balance. So Russia is not happy with this, but Putin is probably also not super unhappy with it because the ban also prevents NATO vessels from sailing in. Ukraine is not happy about it because aid is not coming. But it's also not unhappy because other Russian vessels are not coming. So I think that kind of encapsulates Turkey's very finely tuned Ukraine war policy, where I would describe it as being completely non-binary.
Well, just finally then, you mentioned earlier that of Turkey's many identities, it's probably generally regarded the Black Sea part of its identity as the least sexy, as you put it. Do you think that the events of the last couple of years have changed that it has become more prominent in Turkish thinking about foreign policy?
A little bit, I think. And I think analysts have kind of started to pay attention to the sea. The Black Sea was considered kind of backwaters of strategic thinking. There's great importance attached to it now, not just because of Ukraine war. Georgia is on the precipice of flipping in favor of Russia or not. And there could be a reset of Turkish-Armenian ties, also informing Black Sea affairs. But I think broadly speaking, there's much more attention that's being paid to the Black Sea. That's correct. And also, I think for Turkey, this is kind of reminded the Turks that ultimately Turkey's identities are multiple, and a significant one is a Black Sea Eurasian identity. An identity that is best informed by countries around the Black Sea. But as I said, Turkey is a fascinating place. None of these identities are exclusive. If Turkey is a European country, and it is, it's also the only European country that borders Iran. If Turkey is a Middle Eastern country, and it is, then it's the only Middle Eastern country that's also a Black Sea power. And if Turkey is a Eurasian country, and it is, then it's also the only Eurasian country in NATO. So I think all these things are now layered in Turkey's newfound global identity in the new era.
Soner Cagaptay at the Washington Institute for Near East Policy. Thank you for joining us here on The Foreign Desk. That's it for this episode of The Foreign Desk. We'll be back next week, and look out for The Foreign Desk Explainer, available every Wednesday. The Foreign Desk was produced by Chris Chermak and Christy O'Grady. Christy also produces The Foreign Desk Explainer. To contact the Foreign Desk team, you can email chris@cc@monocle.com, and don't forget to subscribe to Monocle magazine and to our free daily email bulletins by heading to our website at monocle.com. From me, Andrew Muller, thank you very much for listening. Until next time, goodbye.